Uh, I will call the Volkswagen Mitigation Commission to order Wednesday, November the 18th, 2020, 10 a.m. First of all, I want to welcome you. It looks like we're going to be using Zoom for a while longer. I'm going to ask who's going to do the kind of the explanation of the how we're going to handle it. Are you going to do it, Sean?
No, we'll let Ryan do the intros and kind of
Okay.
walk through.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
happy to do that if you'd like me to.
Yes, would you please, Ryan?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Chair Guard. Thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Ryan Clem, Communications Director for IDEM. So we'll be taking questions and comments at today's meeting. If you have a question or technical issue during the presentation, please use the raise hand or chat feature. And so to access those features, they're either at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device. See a menu bar, and you may have to move your mouse or touch your screen for that to pop up. But in the middle of that menu, there's a chat icon, which you click on to show the chat dialog. You should also see the raise hand option as well. So please utilize the raise hand or chat features if you have questions or comments, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. For those joining by phone, if you have a question or comment, you can also raise your hand by pressing *9, and we will call on you. And then when called upon, you'll need to unmute your phone by pressing *6. So for everyone in today's meeting, please identify yourself when speaking. If any members of the media have joined us, please utilize the chat feature or email media@idem.in.gov if you have any questions or would like to schedule an interview. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on IDEM's VW website by the end of this week. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chairwoman Guard.
Okay, first of all, does anybody that's on the meeting have any questions of Ryan about the Zoom process? Okay.
Hi, I just got in a little late, so could you, I don't know if you could recap them like in 1 minute.
Yeah, and I could post them to the chat as well, but you can access the raise hand or chat feature if you have a question or comment. And so those are in the menu bar. You'll see a chat icon to bring up that chat dialog or the raise hand feature. So we'll utilize both of those going forward as we go through the presentation. For those on the phone, again, it's *9. You can raise your hand, and when called upon to unmute your microphone, you can press *6.
Any more questions about the process? Okay.
Nope.
Then we're going to move forward. The next item on the agenda is dealing with rounds 1 and 2, the on-road, non-road project implementation DARA option, and a status report by IDEM.
Here. So everybody should see the presentation. You see the agenda right now, correct?
We do.
Is that was that yes?
Yes.
All right. So bring us to the title screen here real quick. So let's see. First topic is going to be our on-road, non-road DARA option programs update. This will be relatively short and sweet for the committee. So on the round 1 on-road and non-road projects, remember these were the ones that we initiated in early 2019. We ended up with 32 projects. Of those 32 projects, they're all moving forward pretty smoothly. They're either complete or proceeding on schedule, and 13 of those 32 are not only complete projects, but that we have actually provided the Volkswagen trustee the reimbursement package for these. I believe maybe 10 of those 13 have actually been reimbursed back to the entity, so that's good news. Round 1 of the DARA option, remember that's the program that was focused on the non-road sector. We ended up with 5 projects in round 1. One of those has been completed. Actually, more than one of those projects is complete, but they're all moving smoothly. One of them has actually been submitted to the VW trustee and has been reimbursed or is about to be. Round two initiated in early 2020 for on-road, non-road. We ended up with 17 projects. 15 of those 17 have completed the funding agreement process. We're still waiting for a couple of those. So of those 15 projects, those are kind of on their way and being implemented. And we're just waiting for a couple funding agreements to get finalized. Some of them have to go through boards of directors and school boards and such. So there are some slight delays there. And then, as you all know, the round two of the DERA option RFP is currently open and is open until November 23rd, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. It's pretty much where we are on the diesel projects. I think that probably gives you what you're looking for. I presume no questions from the committee? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and move on. So,
Sean,
yes.
we're not seeing the full slides. You might check your display. We're seeing the agenda. We're seeing the PowerPoint program, not the actual show.
Well, that's
Right.
not good. I bet I can fix that though. Let me.
Thank you.
Actually, it says sharing is paused for some reason. So let me stop that. And I'm going to reshare, and we should be back on target here, I believe. Let's see. All right, so tell me what you see now.
Now we see the full slide.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep. After you click that, we should be good. There we go.
and then do you still see the full slide now? All right,
Yes.
we'll get
I
back
got
to
it.
where we
Yep.
were.
We're on track.
Thank you for catching that. Appreciate it. So lion's share we're going to talk about today is the EV charging network program. And I thought it was important that we kind of step back a little bit. As you'll recall, the committee will recall we had some conversation about goals and objectives that we kind of had for the program. And the highlights, I guess I would say, of that goals and objectives conversation from May were the following three things really. And that was that we're looking for a charging network with locations that would focus on the distance between locations as opposed to the location of current EVs. We're looking for DC fast charging networks on Indiana roadways that should be the priority over level 2 that support workplace, shopping, destination, and such. So what we ultimately ended up doing there, if you'll recall, is we all agreed that 90% of the funding dedicated to DC fast and 10% of the funding dedicated to level 2 made sense. So that's what you'll see in the following slides as we move forward. And then the last, I guess I would call our goal or objective was that there was a preference for a viable statewide program. If there was a proposal that was a viable statewide program, that was preferred to sort of a piecemeal approach of, putting together, 20 different pieces of applications potentially if there was a way to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about the application overview here, but I think it's important that we kind of step back just a little bit and remember a couple things. The first thing is the recollection that we have $6.15 million that is available for EV charging across the entire state of Indiana. Based on the conversation we just had, we set aside $615,000 of that, or 10%, for level 2 charging equipment. And just to kind of separate level 2 with DC fast. So an easier way to make comparison is, what is the difference? So a level 2 charger typically will charge a vehicle, give it about 80 miles of range in about 210 minutes. And level 2 chargers are typically best suited to local EV owners who might want to just add a few miles of range while they're parked at work or in a parking garage, or maybe going to a local store or doing some retail shopping, things like that. It's a more local program. We set aside 5.535 or 90% of that for DC fast equipment. And the difference there that you'll see is DC fast will typically charge an electric vehicle, give it about 80 miles of range in 30 minutes as opposed to 210. So obviously that fast is a very key feature. And DC fast equipment is really best suited to the longer distance EV traveler who needs a quick charge during like a fast food stop, or maybe they just need some snacks, or they need to stretch their legs as they're traveling from corner to corner of the state or across the country. And this is the DC Fast is really the focus of the program for the most part as it relates to a legitimate statewide network. So in total, we received 45 applications in response to our RFP. From what I hear from other states, that's a pretty nice response rate, and a couple of our neighbors were a little jealous of the number. Of those 45, 17 of those applications were for level 2 funding in 111 locations across the state. And 28 of those applications were DC Fast to address 176 locations across the state. Now I wanted to identify, just because it's, we've got a few maps that you'll see later in the presentation, or actually shortly in the presentation, but wanted to identify some key cities and towns that were included, because 93 Indiana cities and towns were included in either DC Fast or level 2 charging proposals. Those are 93 unique cities. We're not talking about duplicates. That's after we remove the duplicates. Cities such as Anderson, Batesville, Bloomington, Boonville, Brazil, Carmel, Chesterton, Clarksville, Columbus, Corydon, Crown Point, Elkhart, Evansville, Fort Wayne, Gary, Goshen, Greensburg, Huntington, Indianapolis, Jasper, Jeffersonville, Lafayette, Marion, Merrillville, Michigan City, Muncie, Noblesville, Petersburg, Richmond, Seymour, South Bend, Terre Haute, Valparaiso, Washington, and Whiting. Yes, I just read you a long list of Indiana cities, but I'm sure many people were listening for one or two key cities, and hopefully you heard them there. So we'll talk a little bit about the level 2 proposals and the IDEM recommendation for how to handle level 2. So as we mentioned before, we had 17 applications for level 2 charging equipment in 111 locations across Indiana. Now, 15 of those applications for 55 of those locations were directly from site hosts or local sponsors, very local oriented, if you will, applications. And 2 of those applications that included 56 locations were from applicants for sites that were also included in the respective DC Fast applications. We have a couple DC Fast applicants that propose statewide programs, and these 2 applications kind of coincided with that. They would co-locate some level 2 there was the plan. But of course, that would be in large part driven by whether or not they were to receive a DC Fast award. So we ended up with total projects totaling a little over $2.5 million in level 2, which is a pretty impressive number. The total request from the program was $978,000. The average cost per location was a little over $8,800. And if you'll recall, for a public entity, we would fund up to $9,000 per location. And for a non-public entity, we would award up to $8,000 or cover up to $8,000. That 8811 should give you a pretty good impression that almost all, actually, I believe all but one, were from public locations, and the $9,000 was the award amount requested. And then the total cost share from the applicants was almost $1.6 million. So with that, IDEM's recommendation for level 2 statewide charging network is that we fund the 15 local site host and locally sponsored applications in those 55 locations across the state. And those 55 locations would give us a total cost for level 2 programming of $502,000. Obviously, that leaves $113,000 on the table, so to speak. And IDEM would recommend that $113,000 could be applied to backup level 2 locations for DC Fast sites, or it could be a possible expansion opportunities for level 2 locations to the local host and sponsor applicants that are awarded if they wanted to expand their projects. Now, to put that in some perspective, this is the map of what the IDEM recommendation covers. I think it's important to remember that the level 2 map is really about local benefit. It's about the local municipalities and them having the opportunity for their community to do some charging at the local retail shops and such. This is not the program that's intended to be the statewide program. You'll see more on that one later. So let's go ahead and transition, if we will, to the DC fast charging proposals and the recommendation there. So we received 28 applications for 176 locations across Indiana. 24 of the applications were for 35 locations, and those came directly from site hosts or local sponsors, kind of similar to what we were talking about with the majority of the level 2 applications. And then we had 4 applications that addressed 141 locations across the state that really represent a holistic statewide approach for an EV charging network implementation. Now the financials, if you're interested, we ended up with total project costs, if awarded of, well, the total project cost for all the applicants was around $34.1 million. The total VW requests was about $22.6 million. And remember, this is where we have 5.535 available. So we definitely had a lot of interest in the program. And then the average cost per location ended up being a little, nearly $129,000. And we ended up with about 11.5 million in match from our applicants. So IDEM's recommendation for DC fast charging is a little more complicated than the level 2 recommendation. And that is in large part because DC fast networks are a little bit more complicated as well. When we looked at scoring of the applications and took the quantifiable approach, what we noted was there really wasn't notable separation of the projects. This, of course, relies then on more of a qualitative approach. And in light of that, what IDEM is recommending to the committee is that we pursue additional information through clarifying questions with 4 applicants that provided a holistic statewide approach for Indiana. If you recall above, I said there were 4 applications, 141 locations that were really pretty holistic statewide programs. We would like to pursue additional information from them. And I've got a slide on each of those down the road so you can sort of see the pros and cons of each one and why we think it's really important to do this due diligence on behalf of the Volkswagen Committee. And we would like to provide, this would provide us with the information to make a full and fair comparison between the applicants. And when it says within 90 days, that's a reference to the fact that we intend to give them 90 days to respond to the clarifying questions. And we'll talk a little bit more about those down the slides as well. So this first map that you see here is a map that represents all of the DC fast charging locations that were proposed in response to the RFP. So you can see you've got a pretty good statewide spread. If we had that $22 million, we could just award all of these and we would have a pretty fantastic statewide network. But unfortunately, those are not the funds we're sitting on right now. So IDEM's recommendation is to look at these 4, we call it the short list 4, I guess, programs that provided a holistic statewide approach to the statewide network that the committee was really looking for based on the goals and objectives we talked about earlier. And I realize that maps are easier for some to see than others. It all depends on how big your screen is. But the Opt4EV, which is a company that's based out of Richmond, Virginia, has a pretty good statewide coverage. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of these in the following slides. Zeph Energy has some pretty good coverage as well. You can see with the purple dots across the state. Project Plug-in is kind of a cooperative of multiple applicants. And you'll see in that case that we've got some pretty good statewide coverage represented in blue. And then the Indiana Utility Group came in with a really nice application for 62 projects across the state. And you'll see that in sort of the orangish red. So one of the things that we think is really important is that we do the necessary due diligence to bring to the committee some solid information that allows the committee to make a legitimate comparison of this short list four. These are four quality applications, quality applicants that all have their pros and all have their cons. So I think it's important that we talk a little bit about each of them and sort of why they made that short list four, not only because they were the four that presented a statewide project or a program, but also because of some of the things that you'll see in these bullets. So Op4EV provided a proposal that included 18 locations across Indiana. This would actually be the smallest of the programs that was included. Now, if you'll recall, our requirement was that every location had to have a minimum of 100 kilowatts available for charging. 100 kilowatts to charge one car or 50 kilowatts to charge two. That was the minimum requirement. Op4EV's cost per site ended up being nearly $115,000. And if you'll remember, for the most part, we're looking at $180,000 as the cap, $160,000 to $180,000 as the cap for these projects. So their total ask was a little over $2 million. And you'll see in the case of a couple of these two, they do come in under the 5.535, and that would require us to go out and kind of grab a few additional applicants to maybe fill in the gaps, but it also provides them the opportunity, as we talked about earlier, to take the time to see, is it viable, is it feasible for them to expand their program to be a legitimate statewide program and fill in the gaps that maybe they're not filling right now. So for Op4EV, the geographic distribution covered much of Indiana priority roadways. Several of the interstates were addressed and some of the highways were addressed. One of the things, the Op4EV proposal did have specific site locations identified with addresses. This is something that, we obviously like to see. It shows kind of a shovel-ready proposal. So that is a good thing to see on some of these applications. Project locations do have desired amenities. Remember, we talked about that in our scoring criteria. We wanted to make sure that there were things like gas stations or travel centers or hotels, which is kind of where they've sort of oriented there. So there's a reason, there's a good thing for them to do while they're stopping for these quick ones. And then Op4EV had a very clear and concise budget for their overall project. As you can see in the second bullet, they identified specific technology that they're using. It would be 100 kilowatt technology. And they had a really nice and concise schedule of milestones for their project implementation. Zeph Energy, they provided a proposal that addressed 38 locations across Indiana. These would be managed through a single contact, and the same thing with Op4EV. It's a single contact program. Zeph Energy actually comes in at the highest kilowatt per location. They're proposing 180 kilowatts at each one of their locations, which does kind of address one of the clarifying questions that we're proposing here in a slide or two. Their cost per site was nearly $144,000, and their total ask was about $5.5 million. So they were asking for almost the entire amount to address those 38 locations. The geographic distribution was pretty solid there. They addressed most of the interstates and many of the highways. Their locations are general, and they don't include specific site hosts or addresses. So we had two of the short list four provided specific locations with addresses, and two of them provided less specific general locations, kind of the intersection of Highway A and Interstate B as where they would recommend putting a site. They did provide a clear and concise budget for the overall project, as well as a clear and concise schedule of milestones for the implementation of their project. And it's also worth noting that Zeph Energy is currently implementing a similar project for the state of Minnesota. Project Plug-in. Project Plug-in comes in with 23 locations across Indiana, once again managed through a single contact. They're proposing a technology that would give 125 kilowatts at each location. Their cost per site is the highest of the group at 158,000, and their total ask is 3.6 million. This would be another one of those that we would potentially look at or reach out to and say and ask, do you have the capacity to grow beyond this and kind of fill in the gaps that are shown on the map to make full use of the funding available and provide the greatest spread across the state. Geographic distribution was pretty good, addressed most of the interstates and many of the highways that were identified as key in that map. If you'll recall, we partnered with NDOT, and NDOT created a nice little color-coded map to help guide folks on where we really were looking to have applicants propose projects to be located. Project plugins, project locations were specific and did include addresses again, once again, kind of showing sort of a shovel-ready approach. And although we appreciate the fact that those are shovel-ready, that does not necessarily mean that those that didn't provide specific addresses are necessarily that inferior. It's just another step in the process that we would need to take with them that we wouldn't necessarily need to take with some of the others. The locations that they have proposed have the amenities that we're looking for. They're primarily existing gas stations or travel centers. Remember, these are the ones that you're going to get, you know, a lot of miles, 80 miles in 30 minutes. So, you know, you can stop and wander around the travel center, do a little snack shopping and leave there with a decent amount of miles back on your EV. They provide a clear and concise budget for the project and a clear and concise schedule of milestones. And then the last of our short list four is the Indiana Utility Group. They applied in a single application, a single proposal for 62 locations across Indiana, but they would be managed through 7 different awards and 7 different points of contact. So it's different in that way. It was a single application, but if awarded, this one would have 7 awards to individual utilities that are kind of managing their own projects. There wasn't a reference to any planned equipment or kilowatt per location in their application, other than they intend to meet the minimum specs of the RFP, which most of the equipment that's out there would certainly be capable of doing that. So I don't think that's a thing to be too worried about. The cost per site was a really dramatically low, $89,274. And they were asking for the total of 5.535. Good geographic distribution for sure. All the interstates that were identified as priorities were addressed, and most of the highways that were identified were addressed. The project locations are general here as well and don't include site hosts or addresses. This is similar to the ZEF proposal in that they know where it would be a good location to put, but they haven't necessarily entered into conversation with any entities there on the specific locations yet. There wasn't really a clear budget included in the Indiana Utility Group's proposal, and there was a good general schedule of milestones for the project implementation. So what you can see is that in these 4, they all have some really good things going for them, and they all have the need for some additional clarifications for us to be able to really do the necessary due diligence on the applicants to proceed as best possible forward. So this is an example, I would say, an example list of the clarifying questions that we would be sending out to the shortlist for. And every one of the shortlist applicants would receive a full list of questions or the requests. This list is not intended to be all inclusive, and the questions that are asked may not be relevant to each applicant. Obviously, if we ask, for example, on the first bullet, will the site be future-proof for expansion and or higher kilowatt needs? We want to the extent possible, have programs that actually have room for expansion. You know, will that site be able to do that? That's an important question for us to ask. We're going to ask them to provide specific site addresses and site plans, kind of like maps, if you will, for each one of the locations. For those that have already provided that, they won't need to. For those that have not, this is their opportunity to do that. We're going to ask them to provide a clear description for the amenities within a short walking distance. It's important that when folks are stopping, they have the opportunity to do something to pass that time while shopping. We want to know what's around there so we can make sure that it's a legitimately good location for a charging site. We're going to ask if funding allowed would or could they expand beyond the sites included in their original application to fill in the gaps. If you recall, we had those two that weren't asking for the full 5.535 million. And maybe, this is an opportunity for those other two to say, yes, we have the capacity to expand and fill in those gaps. We just did not have the time to deal with it maybe during the open period of the RFP. And then lastly, if possible, we would really like to have some references for L2 or DC fast charging network programs that folks have managed. I think that's just an important part of the due diligence and the vetting process with these, with the shortlist 4. So at this point, I will stop talking, and if the committee has any specific questions that they would want to ask of applicants, now would be a reasonable time to ask those specific questions. However, if the committee sees this approach of seeking additional information and clarifications from these applicants, the time for those questions may come at the next meeting as opposed to this one. So I leave that to you.
Sean, I like the idea very much of getting more information. I think that to make a good decision, you're going to have to be comparing apples to apples. The one question I have, once you get all of that information, do you score these by points, or this is a little different than some of the other types of projects? And is the point system adequate to make a determination on these?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And, in that first round, it could be because we didn't have complete information on all of the applicants, that we didn't end up seeing a significant spread from, top to bottom, if you will, on the statewide programs, these 4 in particular. But I do believe, and time will prove whether this is the case or not. I mean, we will run them through a quantitative approach again, but I do believe it's highly likely that it will still come back to qualitative considerations when we compare them.
Okay. Are there questions that the commission has of applicants? I expect that we have them in the audience.
This is Jody Peacock. Just a couple questions that come to mind, and probably Sean, you can address these or call in others as needed. So in looking at this, I guess I question whether the RFP process needs to be, or the second round needs to be turned more into, do we want a decision on, do we want one service provider for the entire state? And this, I assume this was a little open-ended in the request. And it looks like there's 2 applicants that the budget wise would take the whole pot versus 2 that you could kind of pair together. So what I'm thinking is, do we want a statewide provider, or do we want break it up, a Northern Indiana provider and a Southern Indiana provider, or maybe 4 quadrants? Do we want to allow for that kind of putting pieces together? I assume that's a little, on the piecemeal side of things. And then the other question I'd ask would be, in looking at the map, it seems to me that you'd want to cover the map as comprehensively as possible. And if the applicants see what we've done here, and even have some overlapping proposals, would it make sense for them to take a look at that and actually provide a more comprehensive set of locations that meets our goals rather than just where they originally thought? So do they want to change their plan based on our goal to have more statewide comprehensive coverage?
Right. Two good questions. The first one, kind of going back to our conversation from May, it did seem that there was a consensus to try to have a statewide approach with the least, I don't want to say the least number, a statewide approach that could potentially be managed through maybe a single point of contact, so that, when issues arise or whenever anything happens, you always know where you're going to go. You'll have consistency around the program if it's kind of administered and managed that way. But I think, in all honesty, it may be a little too early to actually tell. Because what we might find in seeking these clarifications is that we end up with really strong, as you said, a northern Indiana program and a really strong southern Indiana program, and maybe we pair those two. This gives us a little bit of wiggle room, because if you think about the recommendation, 3 of those 4 is a single point of contact, and 1 of them is working with 7 different entities. And that's neither a pro nor a con. It's just demonstrating that we are actually open to doing it with, I wouldn't call that one a piecemeal, because it is 7 Indiana utilities that would be working together on a statewide program. So I think it's important probably for us to get the answers to those questions before we really are able to address whether our goal is one. Our goal is to have the best program for Indiana that we can have. And if we can do that with a single applicant or a single point of contact, or maybe just a couple, I think that would be preferred, because I think it's going to be a better project to be able to manage. Your second question actually really ties in well with some of those clarifying questions. There is an opportunity for those who are not necessarily filling in all of the gaps, and all of them have gaps. Even the utility group's application, which is strong, they point out in their proposal that there are a couple gaps that they recognize. So all of them have gaps. So everybody has an opportunity to go back to the map, so to speak, and say, we do think we could drop some locations here, here, and here to sort of fill in those gaps. So yeah, that's an opportunity that we would be providing them.
Yeah, that's helpful. It does seem that we're kind of going down the road of, okay, here is our maximum budget. We want one provider to cover the state as comprehensively as possible. Here are the holes in your proposal. Can you meet these, this objective with this budget?
Sure.
And so the smaller proposals get a chance to think bigger, and if it's a little over now, then that you can kind of match to where we end up on the number.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think something that's interesting to look at, if you kind of recall those 4 slides, the smaller proposals are the ones that are actually specific. So they probably spend a lot of time and energy identifying site locations, and maybe they didn't have the time and energy to really fill the state. The ones that are statewide are less specific. They now need that time and energy to identify exactly where those locations might be.
Yeah, good point.
Yep.
Thank you.
For me, Sean and Jody, the locations are important, and not having specificity makes it uncertain. And I'd really like all of them to have, here's where we're going to have the locations. And that's the only way we know whether or not the plan actually accomplishes, I think, our goal, which is a statewide charging network that really does alleviate the anxiety of distance with charging stations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important also to note that while on the surface it would appear a larger number of stations is better, it's also entirely possible that some of those station locations are not necessarily ideal. Maybe they're duplicative of other locations. So, I think it's important to really know where those locations are, so we can identify, well, is that location worth our investment of, roughly $200,000 when there's an Electrify America location, 5 miles down the road or something, as an example.
That's really important to me. And you don't want duplication when you're trying to cover the state. It's a balancing act. And the more precise the locations, the better I think we have the ability to judge whether or not that location makes some sense. I think of myself driving a vehicle down the road and needing to get off and charge. I want it as close, in my own opinion, to the highway or the road as possible. And it's unclear precisely where these things are in some of these instances. So,
Right.
and others, it's pretty clear. So, but not maybe absolutely clear. And I know that presents a challenge for the applicants too,
Sure.
which is why the 90 days makes some sense. You
Right.
need to give them time to nail these things down.
Mhm.
Hey, one other question, Sean. It looks like in the shortlist map versus the application map, that some perimeter cities and what I would call major thoroughfares were taken off the list. I guess the main applicants didn't have proposals for those sites, but Terre Haute, kind of the Cincinnati suburb, Lawrenceburg, Greendale, and then also the Louisville suburb, Jeffersonville, Clarksville, that area came off the list. Is that maybe an issue where they've got charging stations across the border that we're not seeing, or was there some other reason those didn't make the applications of the four main players?
Yeah, good question. And I can speak to one of them specifically. Terre Haute does actually have an Electrify America location in town. So I would actually credit all of the applicants for not including that, realizing that there already is some good technology there. So let's not duplicate it. I can't honestly speak to the Louisville area as to why specifically there are no locations down there, but it will be one of those clarifying topics of, and in my mind, that's one of the clarifying questions is we have this list of gaps that we see for a legitimate statewide network. They include Louisville metro area, Cincinnati metro area, including giving them some ideas of those places that we really want to see those gaps filled and see if they have the capacity to fill them.
Yeah, it could be, especially in Louisville, it could be an issue of that's a new interstate or new highway that's built or as the bypass, and there just aren't your long list of service stations in that area. Same with the highway I-69 corridor. You don't have a lot of gas stations right on the side that Bruno can pull over and charge his vehicle.
Right. Well, and you're spot on with 69. I mean, 69, especially south of Indy to Evansville, is a challenge. That's a certain level of dedication by any of the applicants and any vendor to install something down there, because right now there is not a lot down there. So that's an investment in the future, a hopeful investment in the future, really there.
Sean, don't some of the car manufacturers put in charging stations? I think Tesla does.
Yeah, Tesla's really the only one that's currently putting in their supercharger network, and it's a solid network, but it's very proprietary. So, for example, if you're driving a Chevy Bolt, you're not going to be able to charge at a Tesla station, and that's kind of what this program is really geared to do, is to add to the Tesla network, not necessarily take away from it. So in a lot of cases, co-locating in an area where there are Tesla superchargers may make a lot of sense, because the company did their homework when they decided where to drop those stations.
Okay. Any other questions for Sean on this?
So it's Bruno. I just want to say, I think the approach of requesting more information is vital for us to make a decent decision. And I also think the 90 days makes sense, because I think that it's not a simple matter of just giving us a response. I think the proposals will probably need to do some work before they're able to submit stuff. So I just say, I think your approach, Sean, makes a great deal of sense to me.
I do too. I like it a lot. One question that I have is, will eventually we be able to see who the participants are in each of these groups? What utilities are, like the utility group and,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the utility group includes, the 7 major players across the state for sure.
mhm. Any other questions? Well, I think you have the go ahead and request these responses and move forward with this timetable. You think we need a motion for that?
One thing that I did want to clarify, Chair Guard, is that we are making a recommendation for awards in conjunction with the level 2 charging network applications.
Yeah,
It's for the DC fast charge that we were seeking direction from the committee to collect the further information.
right.
Right. So that's exactly right. So we are seeking an approval of the IDEM recommendation on level 2, and we are seeking concurrence of the proposed direction for DC fast.
Okay,
And I think a motion is certainly a reasonable approach to getting that done.
okay. Do I hear a motion to approve the approach that IDEM has presented for the fast charge applicants?
Madam Chairwoman, I would just want to say one other thing, and that is that I wonder, Sean, whether or not the locations of the level 2 stations make a difference in terms of where the locations, the fast charging stations are ultimately laid out, and whether or not we will provide that information to the applicants for the statewide fast charging, so they may adjust or modify any locations that they're thinking of. I think it kind of fits in the big picture.
Sure, that's a good point. Two
Mhm.
things. One, we will, once, if approved, we will make public what the locations for the level 2 charging that were approved, what they are, where they are. And I think that it's feasible that some of the DC fast applicants may look at that and take that into account. However, keeping in mind that, I guess I would say the utilization of a level 2 charger over DC fast is different. And the DC fast is, really geared to be that statewide reach, whereas level 2 is really more of a local.
I agree, Sean. I
right.
totally agree. On the
Right.
other hand, we have one big pot of money here, and we're trying to maximize our spread. And so I think that you're right. They're kind of two different things at the same time. It may play into where you place these things. And I just want to make sure that the applicants have that information to judge when they put together the more expansive proposals. And with that, I would say, I would make a motion to both accept the level 2 proposals from the agency and then propose that we move forward with the questions to the other statewide fast charging station applicants.
Okay. And you made that motion. You weren't asking for it. Okay. Is there a second to?
Second.
Go ahead, Jody.
No
Is,
problem.
is there further discussion on the motion?
One question, I believe there's also the point of what to do with the remaining funds on the L2 proposals. Is that just from the amount, the weight of the applications, it does seem that the DC, the fast charge has a significant need. Would it make sense just to make those funds available for the for the entire DC program, not just L2. I know we said 90%, 10% split, but does it need to stay that way, or can we just allot the entire amount into the fast charging program? And Sean, what is the IDEM opinion of this?
Well, we certainly have the capacity to do that. You know, within, I mean, that's not a significant move. I think that it's a good question and a good observation that I believe as the DC fast clarifications kind of come back, we may get our answer that way too. I guess my point is that 113 that's sitting there, I don't think we need to necessarily decide what we're doing with that today. I think we'll have the opportunity through those clarifications, because one of the things that we will be doing, obviously if you'll recall back on that slide, we said that it would be potentially available for folks to do some L2 or expand in the DC fast area. But also we said that it is an opportunity potentially for those that have applied for L2 to kind of grow their programs a little bit too. So when we communicate with the L2 applicants, we'll be sure to let them know that there is an opportunity to do that if they choose. And if they do, they do. If they don't, maybe DC fast will take it on. We have the flexibility to move those funds if we need to move those funds.
So hold off on that decision now.
Okay,
believe
well,
that
we
looks
got to
appropriate.
finish this vote.
Yep.
All in favor of the commissioner's motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? The motion's passed. So thank you, Sean. That was a good presentation.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you listening and appreciate your support in the process. Looking forward to continue to work with you all and come back to you with some clarifying points that we all want to consider, so make the best choice we can. So actually, I'm going to transition over because people are probably tired of hearing my voice. So I'm going to go ahead and let Scott kind of take over our 20 and 2021 perspective. So Scott, you want to kick that off? I'll move the slides for you.
Yeah, sure, that works. Yeah, so wanted to provide a perspective in terms of how we're going to be moving forward with the mitigation program over the course of the next year. Obviously, today we've handled the level 2 charging projects, and we'll be moving forward with those awards and contracts here over the course of the next few months. The round 2 DERA option solicitation, the applications are due on the 23rd of this month, and then we'll be scoring those projects and preparing award recommendations for the committee's next meeting in January. We are going to be putting together the list of follow-up questions for the DC Fast Charge Network applicants that were shortlisted today. And we would like to get those distributed to those 4 applicants by December 1st and provide them with 90 days to respond. Then in January, we expect to bring the committee back together in order to go over round 2 DERA award recommendations, and then also discuss the round 3 RFP process associated with the on-road, non-road program as we prepare for that solicitation targeted for the spring. Then in March, we would be bringing the committee back together in order to go over the additional supplemental information that we will be collecting from the 4 shortlist applicants for the DC Fast Charge Network. And of course, at that time, we'll also discuss how we want to handle the remaining funds from the level 2 awards that were handled today. Also in March, we intend to post the round 3 RFP for the on-road and non-road projects, and that would be available to the public and stakeholders for 60 days. We'd be getting those applications back in the month of May. Then in July, we would be bringing the committee back together in order to go over our award recommendations for those round 3 proposals for the on-road, non-road awards. And then moving forward, just as far as the meeting schedule, as we summarized before, in January, we'd be bringing the committee together to talk about the round 2 DEER award options, and also the intended RFP for round 3 on-road, non-road projects. DC fast charge network considerations will be the focus of the March meeting. And then in July, we'd be discussing the round 3 on-road, non-road project awards. Just to mention, for 2021, it's very feasible that we may have awarded all of the money under the VW program by the close of 2021, depending on the volume of applications that we receive for the round 3 on-road, non-road projects. I say that because we also would have our 3rd round DERA solicitation in the fall of next year. So 2021 may mark a significant milestone associated with this program. And I don't know if there were any questions from the committee concerning the schedule going forward.
Any questions? Well, it looks good. I suspect that most of those meetings throughout the first half of 21 will be virtual.
Certainly January and March look like they will be.
Mhm. No questions? Well, I don't think this requires a motion. Well, I guess the next thing on the agenda is public comment. I'm sure we have some people that are on this meeting virtually. If you'd like to make a public comment, now's the time to do it. Just hold up your hand on the little icon.
Is that it? Where do you hold up your hand at?
Do you all see anybody?
I don't see anyone with a hand up. We did have a couple questions in the chat about posting the presentation and any scoring information. And I know we normally post that on the VW website. I assume that'll be the same this time, Sean.
Yeah, the presentation will definitely go up. The scoring, we need to look at the spreadsheet to make sure that there isn't any proprietary information, because if you consider the shortlist 4 as an example, for those that are looking for sites, we don't necessarily want them, seeing the others and potentially creating some conflicts.
Well, I would think that until you get back the comments from the other applicants, that you wouldn't want to post scoring information until you hear from them.
That was our original impression as well, Chair Guard.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, it looks like we did have a raised hand. Let's see, for Mayor Weiss, maybe?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mayor Alan Weiss from Greendale, Indiana, down here in the southeast corner of the state. And I just want to thank everyone for consideration, looking at our application, and we won't give up. We'll see what other options are available because, we feel it's a need down this end corner of the state. But once again, just thank you very much for considering.
Anybody else?
from Josh Cohen.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Chair Guard, and to the committee. I'm with Greenlots. We're an EV charging technology company. We've been around over 10 years, and we work across the country and in other countries, and we're very interested in Indiana. We see it as a state with a lot of potential, a lot of which is driven by the interest that this committee and the state's leadership has shown. So I think overall, just a comment about the process and then a couple specific observations. I think the process itself has been an example of how a state should do this. It's been very thorough, open, transparent, trying to take this money that the state was given and figure out what's the best way to leverage it for the best statewide benefit. And I really appreciate, Sean, the opportunity to ask questions throughout this process. Greenlots, early on back in January, I guess, we submitted our initial comments encouraging a statewide holistic approach for the fast charging program. Then more recently, Greenlots submitted a letter in support of the utility group's proposal. So just with that said, I just wanted to offer a couple observations from my perspective, just based on the conversation that's been happening. One is in terms of seeking references, which for a more normal type of technology that's been around longer is certainly a good way to go. I would just caution, obviously for an emerging technology like electric vehicle charging, there are only a handful of actors with a lot of experience. And from Greenlots' perspective, we see utility involvement as a really positive step. So even if some utilities haven't directly managed EV charging programs themselves, I would encourage some consideration for all the other expertise and capability that utilities bring, which this committee is well aware of. The second observation has to do with the locations. I certainly understand the desire to pinpoint as specifically as possible specific addresses at this stage in the process, but I'd also say that allowing some flexibility also has advantages. And just given the timetable of putting together an application and trying to identify specific locations, or specific addresses, there's value to saying, hey, we've targeted these locations, but even if we're awarded the grant, we still have more due diligence to do. There's distribution capacity issues. There's other types of constraints. And so I would just encourage some flexibility in whether or not to require specific addresses at this stage in the process. I think the committee can still ensure that all of its site, desired characteristics are met by requiring committee approval before any specific locations are built out. But I would just, so I'll just leave it there. So again, I really appreciate the opportunity for Greenlots to offer comments throughout this process, and I thank the committee for its thoughtfulness. Thanks.
Well, thank you for your participation. Any other questions?
We have one from Jay Spence. I don't know if it's just a Jay Spence name.
Yeah, this is Justin with the Oscar Larson Company. I was curious, is there any consideration for maintaining the system after it's implemented? Is that part of the scoring procedure? In other words, do you have good service support? As we all know, on a level 3 charger, if it's not working, that's a very bad situation, because at least for the time being, you have limited options to charge up your vehicle. So a strong network support for servicing and maintaining the chargers is key.
Absolutely. And, there is included in the RFP as a requirement for at least 5 years of that service. And we do know, as Josh kind of referenced, if it's one of the main players, we do recognize that they probably have a better capacity to maybe meet those needs beyond the 5 years. And that will be something that will definitely be a consideration, whether quantifiable or qualitative, it will certainly be a consideration.
Yep. Thank you. We have maybe a comment from Leah Maycog.
Yes, hi. This is Leah Thill with the Michiana Area Council of Governments, and just wanted to express our appreciation for the level 2 applications being prioritized for local government involvement. And I know it's been a long road for a lot of those local governments to get involved, identify those locations, but I think having their skin in the game and their involvement in maintaining and funding these stations will pay out dividends in the sustainability of these projects in communities across the state. So we appreciate that consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Colin Murchie with EVgo.
Morning, everyone. Colin Murchie here from EVgo. First, just wanted to state that I'm available if anyone has any questions about our specific application for the Willow Lake East location. Also just wanted to mention one sort of underlying thesis statement that we frequently see in these funding programs that would ask people to challenge a little bit. And that's that DC fast charging or level 3 charging is exclusively for long distance travel and for corridor travel. Obviously, that's a big part of its use case. One of the things that we find on our network very frequently is a lot of use by people in multi-user dwellings, as well as potentially rideshare drivers. So that's just one thing to think about. It's sort of a hybrid. You know, I saw sort of the summary description of like, hey, look, there's one use case where you're driving a long distance and you just want to, you know, stretch your legs, get a coffee, go to the bathroom and charge up, or you're shopping and, you know, have 20 minutes and just want a few miles range. There's definitely a hybrid of those cases where you're sort of dependent on fast charging as an apartment dweller or, you know, a similar use case. So just something we want to have people think in terms of that you may need more fast charging closer to population centers, especially where people are not necessarily in a single family home. So just a use case we wanted to put out there.
Okay, thank you.
Fred Mills.
Can you hear me?
And see you both.
Oh, okay, great. Nice to see you, Bev. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. This has been a long process, and I think you've done a thoughtful way to try and get to a point for the best of Indiana. Obviously, our group, you're all very familiar with this, and you know we're going to be here. Most importantly, when you're looking at electric vehicle charging, and this is what the challenge is, right now, 80% of your charging is going to be done at home. Then the next charging level is probably going to be at work, and that's going to be, we figure, another 10, 15%. Multifamily is definitely a challenge out there. We're trying to figure that out. And then finally, you got about 5% to 10% of the market left for public charging. So you have to think in terms of long term, because the reality of it is we're going to do most of our charging at home. As utilities, obviously, we understand both the impacts of charging to the network as well as the equipment. And so no matter what happens, I can tell you that our group will work with whomever because we are here to try and get electric vehicles going. We see it as a big plus for the state of Indiana, and we want to be part of that. So again, want to thank everybody. We'll be working hard on our responses to that. But again, we're excited about this for the state of Indiana. One way or another, we're going to be part of it as the electric utilities. But again, our ultimate goal is to make it a better place to live.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Lauren Aguilar.
Yes, hi, this is Lauren Aguilar. I'm actually with a sister agency at the Office of the Utility Consumer Counselor. And I was just wondering if the committee was going to take into consideration whether the matching funds from the short list of 4 were coming from private or public funding. Because for instance, the utility group may choose to use funding from shareholders, but they also may choose to use, upon commission approval, funding from ratepayers. And so I just was wondering if the committee was going to give that any type of consideration.
Well, let me ask you this. If it's ratepayer money, do they have to go to the commission for approval?
Yes, ma'am. It would be subject to commission approval, which may or may not slow up the process.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do you have any estimate as to how much time this would add to implementation of the project?
So that would be a little more in the utilities control, and the utility groups might choose to comment. But depending on the type of filing they make, that could add a few months to the process for commission
Would
approval.
that have to go to your office as well?
Yes, our office is an automatic party to any filing made in front of the commission.
Okay.
I
Bev,
will,
if I could
I will
respond to
make
that.
Okay, go ahead, Fred, because I was going
Yeah, I was gonna say,
well
Sean
said.
reached out.
That's right.
Go ahead, Sean, you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. It's a very relevant question, and it's a question that was one of the first due diligence questions we raised of those particular applicants. I sent out an email to all of the applicants that have the capacity to seek a rate case and asked them if this project, as applied, includes or requires any approval of a rate case. And each and every one of them indicated that they have the funds in their pocket to do this project. That is their plan. That doesn't preclude any of the utilities from seeking a rate case down the road, but that is not their current intent. You can speak beyond that if you want, Fred, or you can just nod and say, yeah, that was more or less it.
That was it.
Thanks for that clarification. That is helpful, because I know our agency has been monitoring this process very closely, just in our role as, watching out for ratepayers who may be responsible for funding some of these projects.
Well, I want to thank the utilities for working that out, because it could, if it went to the ratepayers, it could add, I think, some significant time to the project, and that wouldn't be good. Anybody else?
I'm Chair, I don't see any more on my end.
Okay. Well, with that, let me add, I think this process has certainly, from my standpoint, been the most exciting and I think extremely important. I've been in some meetings recently, hearing people talk about that are experts in the field. Electric cars are really beginning to come into their own and going to be a driving force in the future. And so I think it's just imperative that Indiana be judicial in how they utilize this Volkswagen money. And I can't think of a better way to use it than this. I'm really pleased.
Senator Gard, I couldn't agree more. I think this has the opportunity of being the transformational project that the governor was hoping that this committee would be able to use the VW money for. It's very exciting, and I'm excited that we're doing the thorough job that people talked about of evaluating all these proposals, because I think it could make a big difference here.
Oh, it really could.
Chair Gard, just one other thing I forgot. We do have several people on the calling in. So
okay.
If there's questions there, they can press *6 to unmute their phones and ask a question if there are any. And second. I don't see anyone popping up here.
Okay. Well, any closing comments from other members of the commission? Well, if not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Thank you all very much for your time this morning. I think it was very productive.